So in this video, I'm gonna explain how everything you need to know about oil painting can be learned through painting these apples. Now, obviously I'm not gonna be able to get into every single little thing you need to know about oil painting. So I'm just gonna go over the big main ones that are my favorites. And I'm not talking just about apples in particular. Pretty much any simple still life will do. Okay, so let's talk about drawing. Drawing is one of the most important parts of oil painting. You can never be good enough at drawing. And doing these apples, you are gonna have to practice your drawing. I know it might sound simple. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna put 3 circles and you got apples. No, not that easy. There's a lot more that goes into it. A lot of times drawing in these simple still lifes like apples is a lot harder than you think. Now, whether you want to do portraits or landscapes, you're going to need strong drawing skills. If you want to get a good likeness in a portrait, that's mostly drawing. If you struggle with perspective in landscapes, that also is drawing. Now, for these apples, I had to be aware of a lot of things. I had to be aware of the different sizes. They're not all the same size. I had to be aware of where they're placed. You know, the bottom of this apple is definitely lower than the bottom of this apple. So even though I'm just painting simple apples, I'm getting good drawing practice. All right, now let's talk about composition. Gonna be honest with you, the hardest part about this still life was setting it up. It probably took me over an hour to just place these apples in an interesting way on the canvas. I took lots of different photos of different setups, and I ended up settling on this one because I really liked the way the shadow angled into the frame, and then the apple in the back kind of brings you back across the canvas. In a lot of ways, I feel like coming up with a good composition with still lifes is harder than, say, a landscape, even though landscapes might seem more complicated because there can be a lot of things in one scene. There could be trees with mountains and a lake and grass and all this different stuff. But when it's something simple, just like 3 apples, you have less to work with. So you have to be really creative and really understand composition to get it right. Now, I made a whole video on composition, so if you want more information on that, I'll put a link to where you can watch that video right here. Now, even in portraits, composition is very important. You got to know where you're going to place the person on the canvas. You don't want to put them too high. You don't want to put them too low. You know, what direction are they looking? Do they have their hand up? Is there a background? Is there another person in the portrait? There's just a lot of things that you need to be aware of to make it the best that it can be. So if you want practice with composition, painting a still life will give you that. Okay, next subject I want to talk about is simplification. Now, ironically, being able to simplify a scene isn't as simple as it sounds. It actually takes a lot of practice, and doing still lifes will give you that practice. Like when I first started painting these apples, I blocked them into just big shapes of light and shadow. I'm not really even worried about the color right now so much as the values and mapping out what's light and what's dark. I do a very similar thing when I paint portraits. I block out the face into light and dark shapes. The exact same thing with landscapes. I block out the scene in big shapes of flat color, mainly paying attention to value. What's darker than what's lighter than what. And I simplify a scene simply by just squinting my eyes and getting rid of detail. I can't stress enough like how important it is to be able to simplify a subject. Squint your eyes, get rid of detail, especially at the beginning of the painting. It just sets you off on the right track. A lot of people get into detail too quickly, and they build a painting off a foundation of shapes that aren't correct. All right, next I want to talk about planes of an object and form. I found that once I really started to focus on understanding form and the planes of an object, no matter what the subject was, I saw the quality of my work take a drastic step up. With these apples, it's good to not see them as curved and round and smooth, but rather a series of flat planes. This will help you with a lot of things. One, it's going to help you identify the light source. So what do I mean by that? Well, you can see here on this apple at the bottom, there's this warm reflected light happening. It's light that's bouncing from the ground up onto the bottom of the apple, and that apple is catching that light because it is facing down towards the ground. The plane of the apple that's facing up towards the main light source is getting a different kind of light. Part of the apple that's in shadow that's facing a different direction than the main light source is getting some cooler ambient light. Idea in the planes will also help influence your brushwork. I would say you don't want to waste your brushwork. You don't want to just be putting arbitrary strokes. You want these strokes to better communicate the form of what you're painting. Try to think of it as if you are wrapping your brushstrokes around the subject. So if you're thinking about it in terms of planes, you're painting along a plane. And so changing the direction of your brush will indicate a change in direction on the surface of the object. If you've ever painted portraits before, you're probably familiar with the planes of a face. These are very important, and a lot of times at the beginning of my portraits, that's all I'm thinking about, making big strokes and really trying to carve out the general form of the face with these planes. Now, I know you're probably thinking like, Chris, there's no way that like an apple is similar to a portrait. Like a face is so much more complex. There's all the features, there's a nose, there's eyes, there's the mouth, there's all these detailed, intricate things. How can it be similar? It's just so much more complicated. Actually, it's not. It's just a lot of the same process repeated at different scales. Finding and identifying the planes and the form is the same no matter what it is you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's an apple or if it's an entire face or a nose or an eye. The process is still the same. So if you're working on a portrait when you're starting out, the planes you're identifying might be really big at first, but as the portrait goes on, you're just identifying smaller planes and smaller forms. So this idea of being able to identify the form comes into play with any object that you paint. So even if you're painting landscapes, you still got to be able to look at something and understand how it's shaped and what light is hitting what part of that object. And yes, in a landscape, it can be very difficult because you're dealing with a lot of objects. There can be a lot of reflected light. So it's good to practice with a still life because it's just so simple. It's very clear what the surface is, what the form is, and where the light source is coming from. And now you're going to be able to create form by using different values. And that is the next thing I want to talk about, values. I always say value does all the work and color gets all the credit. I spent the majority of this painting just really working the values and the value relationships. How light or dark is something? What's lighter than what? What's darker than what? And how do I make the transition from dark to light? Because those transitions are going to help indicate the form. It's just so important that you develop your ability to correctly identify values. So many times I take a look at students' work and I'll take a picture of it and put it in black and white and say, look how much darker your dark area is opposed to your reference. Look how much lighter this area is than that. People get so caught up in color that they don't realize how off their values can be. And in things like landscapes, values are huge. There's the value planes of a landscape. Your sky is going to be your lightest value, followed by your ground. And then these slanted planes like hills or mountains are going to be slightly darker. And then any upright objects like trees, houses, people are going to tend to be your darkest value. So if you got a mountain and a tree in the same value, it's just not going to look right. Now, when it comes to portraits, it's just a lot of subtle value transitions. I see a lot of people get good values in portraits, but their transitions from dark to light can be pretty harsh. And that's how you can get faces that look kind of cartoonish or very rigid, is because they're not finding transitional values to put in between those light and dark shapes. And the more transitional values you find, the more subtly you can mold and shape the form of what you're painting. If you need to, paint your still life with just black and white. That's a great way to practice values. On the opposite end, another great way to practice values is use a bunch of crazy colors that are unreal. I've done a whole video on this where I did a black and white portrait with just a bunch of random colors, and what this does is it helps you identify the value of a color. It doesn't matter what color it is, where does it fall value-wise with the other colors on the painting. All right, so I hope this video showed you how much you can get out of painting still lifes, how what you learn will translate through everything that you paint. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you struggle with color mixing, I got a free color mixing tutorial from my course in the description below. And if you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.